In this video, we will create an API in Node.js, specifically Express.js, and we'll be using MongoDB on the cloud as our database. So right now I have a new empty folder, and let's start by creating our package.json file, and I'm going to do that by running npm init-y, and our package.json file was created. Here it is. And the first thing I'm going to do is to change its type to module, because I want to use the modern module syntax. And on top of that, I'm also going to update my script. I don't want a test script. Here I'm going to have my start script, and it's simply going to be Node, and then the name of my main file, which will be app.js. And another thing I want to add here is the watch flag, so --watch, and this will restart my server when any changes are detected. So let's move on to creating our main file, which, as I said, is going to be app.js. So this is it. Now, before we can actually start doing anything, we should probably install our npm dependencies. So npm install, and I'm going to keep it simple for this project. It's only going to be Express and Mongoose, and both of them are now installed. Let's take another look at package.json, and under our dependencies, we can now see both of them, both Express and Mongoose. So that's fine. Let's get back to app.js, and let's start by importing Express. So import Express from Express, and let's define the port. I'm going to use port 5000. And let's also create our Express instance. And I want my server to start listening to the port that we defined, and to do that I can use app.listen. And the first parameter is the port. The second parameter is the callback that we want to run once the server actually starts listening to the port. And now when we will start the program, the server will listen to this port. This is going to be an API, and our requests are going to contain body, and some of the body will be in the JSON format. So I need the middleware to help me pass the JSON from the body of these requests. And that's why here we're going to use the express.json middleware. And now it's time to actually start creating our routes. So let's create here the first route, and this is going to be the get route. And the address of this route is going to be API. All of our routes are going to be under API. And specifically, it's going to be under to-dos, because this request is going to take care of the to-dos resource. And let's write the function to take care of requests to this route. And I'm going to start simple. Let's just return a JSON that says hello world. And let's also create a post request, because we want our API to be able to add new to-do items. So I'm also going to add here a post route. And it's going to use the same address because it's taking care of the same resource. And we need to write a function for this as well. And again, I want to start simple. Maybe here I can return that says post route, and this one will say get route. And let me now start my server. So npm start, and the server is now listening to port 5000. And now I can open Postman and create a new HTTP request. And let's start with a get request. So the request is going to be sent to localhost, of course, at port 5000. And specifically, it needs to be sent here, API to do's. So this is what I'm going to write here. And if we are sending this request, we can see get route. And if we are changing this to post and send the request, we get here post route. Now, the thing is that I don't want my routes to be here in the main file. I actually want them to be in a dedicated routes file. So let me stop my server for a second and create a folder called routes. This folder will contain our route file. So make directory routes. And now in the routes folder, I'm going to create a new file called to-do routes.js. And let me open my Explorer just so you can see it visually. And here it is. Here is the routes folder. And here is our new to-do routes file. Now, this file is also going to use Express. So I need to import Express. And here, instead of creating a new application, we're going to use express.router. And let's also open our app.js file. So I'll open it here on the right. Here it is. And here is what I'm going to do. I'm going to take these two routes. I don't want them here in the main file anymore. So let's remove them from here. And let's move them over to the new routes file. So I'll paste them here. And of course, this time it's not going to be app.get, but it's going to be router.get. So here it's going to be router. And then we need to export our router. And this is the only thing that we are going to export from this file. So export default router. And now in the main file, I'm going to use the router that I defined here. So first I need to import this router. And the extension of the file needs to be .js. And since I exported it as default, I can change the name, and it's going to be to-dos router. And now here I'm going to use this router that we defined, so app.use, and then the name of the router, in my case, to-dos router. And the first parameter is going to be the relative path. So as you can see, both of these routes have the same prefix. And actually, it's exactly the same URL. So this is the URL that I am going to use as the prefix for all of the routes of this router. And now, since I already specified it for the router, I don't need to rewrite it here. So here it's just going to look like this, like /, and also in this route, just /. And let's restart our server. And let me open Postman again. And let's try to send our GET request. And you can see GET route. And if we are sending the POST request, we get POST route. Next, let's set up our MongoDB database. So let's open the web browser, and we need to go to cloud.mongodb.com. Here it is, cloud.mongodb.com. And I'm already logged in. If you are not logged in, then I'm going to create my cluster. So let's create, and I'm going to go with a free plan. I don't want to preload sample dataset, so let's uncheck this. And for the name, I'll just go with cluster 0, and let's create deployment. Great. And now we need to go here where it says drivers, and I need to make sure that Node.js is the selected choice. And here I don't need the full code sample, so let's change this. And now we can see the connection string. Let's copy this, and let's get back to our code. Now, what are we going to do with this connection string? I'm going to store it in my .env file. So let's create this file. So it's simply going to be called .env, like this. And this is, of course, a secret. This is something that we do not want to expose. And I'm going to call this secret MongoDB URI. And now I can paste here what I just copied from the MongoDB website. So here it is. But we do need to update one thing here, and this is the password, because right now we only have a placeholder for the password, so this needs to be replaced. So once again, let's go to the MongoDB website. And to find the password, I'm going to choose here database access. And as you can see, this is my username, and it's already written here, right? This is the username. And I'm going to click here where it says edit, and here I can edit password. So let me enter a new password, and we need to scroll down and update user. And now back in my code, I can write the same password that I specified in the website. And one more thing that we need to do here is to add something here, right after where it says mongodb.net /. So here I need to specify the name of the database that I want to work with. This can be anything you want. I'm just going to call it db1. You can choose whatever you want. And now I'm going to create a new database file for the connection to the database. So database.js. And here we are going to use Mongoose. So let's start by importing Mongoose. And I'm only going to have here one function, which is connectDB. And all we're going to do here is mongoose.connect. And as a parameter, we need to pass the connection string. And since the connection string can be found in my .env file, this is going to be process.env. The name of my secret. So let's open again the .env file. And here is the name of the secret, MongoDB URI. So let's copy it and let's paste it here. And this function is asynchronous. So here I'm going to add a wait. And once the connection is done, let's add a log here so it will be very clear that we actually connected to Mongo. And finally, I want to export my function. So export default, the name of the function, which is connectDB. And now let's reopen app.js and let's import this function. And the first thing that we're going to do in our server as soon as it loads is to connect to the database. So let's add a call to this function. And another thing we have to do is to update our npm script. So let's open package.json once more. And here in my start npm script, I'm going to add another flag. And this flag will tell our Node application to read the .env file as soon as it loads. So --env file equals, in my case, .env. So that's it about this file. And let's now start our server. And we can see MongoDB connected, which means that we successfully accessed the secret in the .env file and provided the correct connection string. Now, to be able to do anything useful with Mongoose, we need to start by defining a schema and create a model that's based on this schema. This is usually done in a separate file. So let's now create our to-do model file. So first, let me create a folder called models. So make dir models. And in this, I'm going to create my to-do model. And this file is also going to use Mongoose, of course. So let's import it. And now let's define our to-do schema. This can be done by creating a new mongoose.schema. As a parameter to the schema, we need to pass an object. And here we need to specify the different fields that we want our documents to contain. In my case, this schema is for to-do items. So every one of them is going to have a title and a completed state, which is going to be a Boolean. So the first key is simply going to be title. And the information about this field needs to be another inner object. And here we need to specify the type, which is going to be string. And notice that Mongoose uses string with capital S. And I also want this field to be required. So required is going to be true. I now want my second field to this schema, which is going to be completed, and its type is going to be Boolean. And now that we have our schema, we need to create the model. The schema is not enough on its own. To be able to actually create documents using this schema, we need a model that is based on it. So to create this model, we're going to use mongoose.model, and we need to send two parameters to model. The first one is the name of the model. This is a string, and usually we send here a name in the singular form. And the reason is that MongoDB, the database itself, is going to take this name and pluralize it. So the connection is going to be very similar to this, but in the plural form. And this is why I'm sending here something in the singular form. And the second parameter is the schema that we are basing on. In my case, this is the to-do schema. And let's store it as our to-do model. And finally, we need to export this model, so I'll export it as default. Now I want to go back to my routes file, and let's start with our post route. So I'm going to resume that requests to this route are going to contain the information for the new to-do item in their body. And I'm going to use the body of these requests to create new to-do items in my database. So first, let me import my model from here. So it's going to be the to-do model, and here we need the .js extension. And here, where I'm handling the request, we want to create a new item that's based on this model. And to do that, we need to write new to-do model. And as a parameter, we need to pass an object containing the information for the new document that we are about to create. And once again, I'm going to extract this data from my request. So here it's going to be request.body, because the body is going to be an object containing all of the information for the new to-do item. And let's store this as the to-do item. And to actually upload it to the database, we need to take this new item, this to-do item, and call the save method. And this will actually save it in the database itself. So let's once again open Postman, and let's try to send a post request. And now we have to have a body for this request. So here let's choose the body tab, and I'm going to choose raw. And here we have to change this drop-down option from text to JSON, and let's provide the data for the new to-do item, and it has to follow the JSON format, of course. So it needs to have a title, say take out the trash, and also completed, say true. And let's send the request, and we need to start our server, and let's send the request. And once again we can see post route, and let's open the MongoDB website. Let's go back to clusters, and here I'm going to choose browse collections, and here we can see under DB1, under this database DB1, that we have a new collection called to-dos, and it contains one document with the information that we just provided. And what might make more sense is, instead of sending this constant string, I can await to save to return, so this function will have to be async, and then I can simply send back to the client the new to-do item. So response.json to do. And let's try to add another one, say feed the dog, and this is going to be false. And let's send this request as well, and we can see that this document was sent back. And let's take a look at the Mongo website again, and here I can refresh, and now we have these two documents. Next, I don't want my route to do so much work. This is why I'm going to create a controller, because the route file is only supposed to take care of the routes, the endpoints to which the client can access, but it's not supposed to do so much work, because right now it extracts the body from the request, and then it creates the new to-do item and saves it to the database. This is something that I don't want to do in the route. The route is supposed to be something very simple, something that is there to receive the requests that are sent from the client and send them over to someone who is in charge of actually taking care of them. This is why I want us to create the controller. So once again, let's take a look at our Explorer, and I'm going to create here a folder called controllers, so make directory controllers. And in this new directory, I'm going to create the new file, and I'll call it to-do controller. So to-do controller.js, and here it is. And maybe we can place the controller and the router side by side. And now the controller is the one that's actually supposed to do the work. So I'm going to create here in the controller a new function called createToDo. And since this function is going to be called from the router, we're also going to send it the request and response parameters. And now that we have this function, I basically want to do here in the controller what we did before here in the router. So let's take these few lines and let's remove them from the router and paste them to the controller. And of course we now have a wait here, so this function has to be async. And while we are here, we should probably update the return status code from this function, because in this function we are creating a new resource and the correct status code from such a response should be 201. The default for Express is 200, which means that everything was okay. But here it's beyond just okay. We want to let the client know that a new resource was created because we are creating a new to-do item. So here, where we are sending the response, I'm going to specify that the status code is going to be 201. And on top of that, since we are accessing the database and trying to add a new document, we should probably add error handling. So I'm going to wrap this in a try block. And then we, of course, need the corresponding catch block. And if we are in the catch block, it means that we encountered some error. So in this case, I want the status code to be 500, server error. And I'm going to send a JSON where the key is message. And the value is the message from the error, like the message describing the error we encountered. And now, from the controller, I want to export this new function, the create to do function. But this time it's not going to be default. We are going to have here more functions. This one is used to create a new to-do item, but later on we will have more functions to have more functionality in our controller. So let's export this function. And now in the router, we need to import this function. So let's import create to do. And now when handling the post route, we're not going to do anything smart here. We're simply going to delegate the request to the controller. So all I'm going to do here in this route is call create to do. And of course I need to pass the parameters for the request and response. By the way, we're not using the model anymore here in the router, but we are using it in the controller. So let me move this to the controller. And actually in this route, we can simplify things even further, because turns out instead of this, the callback for this route that delegates the request to this function, we can simply write it like this. We can simply write that the function that is taking care of this route is create to do. So it can definitely look like this. It doesn't even have a body. We're simply saying that the function that's taking care of this route is the create to do, which is implemented in the controller. And let's open Postman once again. And let's try to add another to do item, say eat breakfast. And this is a post request, of course. And let's send it. And I should probably start my server. So let's try sending the request again. And we can see the response containing the details for the new to do item. Let's look at the database itself and let's refresh it. And we can see that we now have the 3 document. But to be completely fair, even though we now have separation between our routes and our controllers, we're still doing too much in our controllers. If we want to have a really neat architecture, the controller is not supposed to access the model directly. So let's open our controller file again. And as you can see right now, this is what we are doing, right? We are using the model to create the new to-do item, then we are saving it to the database. This works, but it's not perfect from the standpoint of separation of concerns. The better approach is to have a service. The service is the one that's supposed to know the model itself. The controller should have the business logic, but it should not work with the database and the model directly. So this is what we're going to do next. We're going to have a service. The controller is going to talk to the service, and the service is going to talk to the model, through which it will interact with the database. So let's create a services folder. So make directory services, and in this folder I'll create my to-do service, so to-do service.js. And in the service we're going to have something that at first glance looks very similar to what we have in the controller. But again, the goals are different. The goal of the controller is to hold the business logic. The goal of the service is to talk to the database through the model. So in the service, I'm going to create a new function. And once again, it's going to be create to do, because this is the function that will create a new to do item to the database. And notice that the function in the service does not have request and response parameters. It knows nothing about the request as an HTTP request. The only thing it knows and cares about is how to work with the database correctly. To make things a bit clearer, because they are so similar, I'm going to add here the suffix sr so that it's easy to remember that this one is the service function. But this is something I'm adding just for the ease of understanding. It's not really needed. It's completely okay if they have the same name. And now everything that has to do with the creation of the new to-do item using the model is going to move to the service function. So from here, I'm going to remove these 2 lines, because once again, this is the interaction with the model and the database. I'm going to remove them from here, and let's move them to the service function. And of course, this will now have to be an asynchronous function. But as I said, I don't want this function to know what the request even is. I don't want it to work with the request object. So this is why to this function, I'm going to send as a parameter the actual data. The data that needs to be contained in the new to-do item and hence saved to the database. So here I'm going to have a parameter called data, and this is what I'm going to use to create the new to-do item. And also I want to return the document that I just saved to the database so that I can return something to the controller so it has something to send back to the client. So here I'm going to add return. And now, of course, the import of the modules does not need to be in the controller. So I'm removing it from here, and let's move it to the service. So it's going to be here. And now let's export this new function, the create to do service function. So let's export it. And now in the controller, I need to call this function. So let's start by importing the function from the service. And now I should be able to call it. So here let's call create to do service. And we need to send the data to the service function so that we know the data for the new to do item. And this data is something that we're going to retrieve from the body of the request, of course. So here it's going to be request.body. And since this is an asynchronous function, I need to await. And the service function returns the to-do item that was created. So let's store it in a temporary variable. And this is the variable that I'm using to send the response back to the client. Now, because of the big similarity between the functions in the controller and the service, I want to make here a small change. Instead of exporting normally, I want to export default. And what this is going to allow me to do is make the access to the service functions from the controller a bit clearer. Because here, instead of importing the functions directly, I'm going to import this entire object. So here it's going to be import to do service and not the functions themselves. And now I'm going to use this service whenever I want to use any of its functions. So here it's not just going to be create to do service, but it's going to be to do service dot and then the name of the function. So you don't really have to do it this way, but in my opinion, again, because of the big similarity between the functions here and here, it might be a bit clearer if we're doing it this way. And let's open Postman once again. And this time let's send it lunch and let's send the request and we can see the item that was added. So let's go over our chain of calls once again. We're starting with our app.js. This is the main file. And in this file we are using our routes file. So to-do's router. And this file specifies the routes that we actually have. So we can see that here we have the post route. It belongs to API to-do's because all of the routes in this router are there. That's what we defined in app.js. And as you can see, the implementation here is very, very simple. It simply calls create to do, which is a function from our controller. And here we can see the controller function. And as we can see, this is the one that's supposed to do the heavy lifting. It extracts the data from the body of the request. And also once it knows what it needs to do, it sends the response back to the client, which can either be a success message or a failure message. What it doesn't do is interact directly with the database, with the model and the database. This is something that we're doing in our service. So the controller calls this function, which is in the service. Let's open it here. And here in the service, we are using the Mongoose model to actually create the new to-do item and save it in our database. Once we have that, we return the response back to the controller, which then uses it to send the response back to the client. Let's now add to our API the ability to retrieve all of the existing tasks, all of the to-do items that currently exist in our database. So we're actually going to start from the end. Let's start from the service. So let me open this file here. So in my service, I'm going to create a new function and I'm going to call it getToDo's. And once again, I'm going to follow my own convention. So here I'll add the suffix _sr so that I know that this function belongs to the service. And in Mongoose, to retrieve all of the documents that belong to a specific collection, we need to write the name of the model that represents this collection. In our case, it's to-do model. And using this model, we can use find. This is the function that returns all of the documents in the collection represented by this model. And this, of course, is an asynchronous function, so I'm going to add here await. Then all I'm going to do here is return the result. So the only thing the service is doing is interacting with the database using the model and nothing else. This function will be called by the controller, and the controller is the one that actually decides what needs to be done with this information. So let's add this function to the list of our exports, and let's now open the controller here on the right. And I'm going to have here in the controller a function that shares the same name. But of course it will not have the _sr suffix. So let's define it here. And as you can see here, I already defined the request and response parameters because this function will be called from the route. So we will have access to these two parameters. Here I don't have too much to do in the controller. I don't have any information that I need to extract from the body of the request or anything of that nature. So I'm simply going to call the function from my service. And to do that, I use my to-do service that I imported here. So to-do service dot get to-dos. And of course, since this is an asynchronous function, I'm adding here a wait. And let's store it in a local variable. And now we can send it back to the client as our response. So response.json. And in our JSON, we're going to send our to-dos. Let me also specify here the status code, which is going to be 200. Whenever I interact with the database, I should probably add error handling. So let me wrap these two lines in a try block, and I need the corresponding catch block. And if we encountered an error, I'm just going to do what we did here. And now my controller can get all of the to-dos. So let's export this function as well. And the next thing would be to open our routes file. So here on the left, let me open my to-dos router. And we actually already have the placeholder, it's here. And once again, it's going to be very simple. We're only connecting the getToDos function from the controller to this route. So here, it's going to be getToDos. And of course, we had to import it as well. Let's get back to Postman. And now I try to send a GET request. And the URL is going to stay the same because as you can see here, the GET and POST routes share the same URL. So let's send our request. And we can see the list of the to-do items that we currently have. And we can change the view so it's a bit clearer. So we can see here the take out the trash task, the feed the dog task, and so on. Another thing that a lot of APIs have is the ability to retrieve a single element using its ID. So let's say that I want to support the retrieval of one specific to-do item using its ID, right? Because each of our to-do items has its own unique ID, and I want to be able to use this ID to retrieve the corresponding item. So once again, we're going to start with the server. So let's open the service file. So just like we had here getToDos, I want to add another function called getToDo by ID, because this new function will retrieve one single to-do item based on its ID. So I am expecting the ID of the item as a parameter to this function. And Mongoose supports this kind of retrieval very well. All we need to do is write our model, to-do model in my case, dot find by ID. This method is specifically for retrieving a document based on its ID. And as a parameter to this function, I'm going to pass my ID. And this is, of course, an asynchronous function, so await. And once again, I'm not going to do too much in this function. I'm just going to return the result so that the controller can decide what needs to be done with it. And let's add this function to the list of our exports. Next up is the controller, because the controller is the one that will call this function. So let's open the controller here. And once again, I'm going to create in my controller a corresponding function, but this one does not have the _sr suffix. And instead of the ID parameter, it has the request and response parameters. Now, I'm going to expect the ID of the item to be retrieved as a path parameter. And to extract a path parameter from a request, we can do that by request.params, then the name of the path parameter, which is going to be ID in my case. And this is going to be the ID of the to-do item that we want to retrieve. And now that I have this ID, I can call this function from the service. So await to-do service dot get to-do by ID. And let's pass the ID parameter. So the response from this function is going to be the to-do item that I retrieved. Let's store it in a temporary constant. Then we can send it back to the client. And once again, the responsible thing would be to wrap it in an error handling block. So try here. Otherwise, I'm going to return the error message, just like we did here. But here in this request, we can actually run into another kind of problem. And this is if the user tried to access an item that does not exist in the database. So I'm going to add a check here. And if the to-do item that was found is null, it means that such an item with this ID could not be found. And in this case, I'm going to return 404 because this element could not be found. Next, let's open our routes file. And now I want to add another get route, which is very similar to the one we currently have. But this one is also going to expect the path parameter. So here I'm going to define the path parameter, so ID. And this is why ID is going to be the name of the path parameter. And the function that will take care of it is this one, getToDo by ID. So we should export this one, and we should also import it in our router. and this is the one that we're going to connect to this route. So let's get back to Postman and take one of the IDs here, for example this one, and let's send another GET request, but this time I'm also going to send a path parameter, and the value I just copied is going to be the value of the path parameter. So let's paste it here, and let's send the request, and we can see that we got back the take out the trash to do item. Let's try another one, so I'll remove the path parameter, and let's, for example, take the ID of this one, send this one as the path parameter, and let's send it, and now we got back the eat breakfast to do item. The next logical step for our API is the ability to update existing tasks. And specifically, I want to be able to change tasks from incomplete to completed and vice versa. So basically, I want to be able to change the value of the completed field for existing tasks. So once again, we're going to follow the same order. And once again, we are going to start from our service. So let's open here the service. Here it is, the to-do service. And just like we had get to do and create to do, I now want to add a new function for update to do. Now, we need to think about the parameters that this function should accept. So it's going to expect two parameters. The first one is going to be the ID, and this is the identifier of the task that we want to update. This is very similar to what we had here, get to do by ID. The ID was the identifier, the unique identifier of the task that we wanted to retrieve. Now we will be using this parameter in a similar fashion. But now, of course, it's not in order to retrieve the task, but in order to update it. And on top of that, I want a second parameter to which I'm going to call completed. And this is going to be the updated value for this task, whether or not it needs to be marked as completed. And once again, Mongoose does a great job here, so it's going to be really easy if we're using the correct method. And specifically the method that we are going to use, and once again, we're going to access it from our model, so to do model. And the function that we are going to use is find by ID and update. So this one is exactly for this use case. We want to find the document by its ID, and then we want to update some field in this document. And we need to pass two parameters to this function. So the first one is the ID of the document that we want to update. So in my case, it's ID. This is the parameter to the function. And the second one is an object. And this is going to be the new value for the document with this ID. Now, the thing is that we don't have to send all of the fields of the document. In my case, I only want to update the completed field, and this is because I don't want to change the title. The document needs to stay with the same title it had before. And this is why this object, the object that I'm writing here, is only going to have one field, which is completed. And the value for this field is going to be what we got in the parameter, which is once again completed. And as you might know, in JavaScript, when the key and the value are completely identical, we actually don't have to write them twice. We can just write it in this shorthand form. And if I just write here completed within my object, it means that both the key and the value are completed, are the same thing. I can also pass an optional third parameter, which is another object called new. And I'm going to give it the value of true. And now this function will return the updated value of the document. Once again, this is an asynchronous function, so I'm going to add here a wait. And I want to return the updated value of this document from this function. And let's also export this function from our service file, so I'm going to edit here. The next step is going to be the controller. So let's open the controller here on the left. And once again, I'm going to keep the same pattern. So here I'm going to have a new function, and it's going to follow the same name that we used here. So once again, it's going to be update to do. And this function has request and response as its parameters. So I'm going to start by finding the ID of the document that I need to update. And this is something that will be included in the request as a path parameter. So I can use this line again to find the value of this path parameter. And what about the updated completed value? Whether or not this task needs to be marked as completed. So this is something that the request is going to send in the body. So let's extract this value from the body and store it as a local constant. And to extract it from the body of the request, I need to access the request.body and then this field from within the request. So I'm going to expect the body to contain a field called completed. This way I can extract the field completed from the body of the request and store it in this local constant. Now this value has to be a Boolean value, of course. So just to be on the safe side, let me add a check here. Let me verify that this value is a Boolean indeed. And if it's not, I'm going to return back to the client status code 400 because the body of the request must contain the completed field and the type of this field has to be Boolean. And if this is fine, I can simply call my update to do function from my service. So let's access our service and use it to call the update to do function. And now we need to send these two parameters. So the idea is what we extracted from the path parameter. And isCompleted is what we extracted from the body of the request. We have it here. And once again, this is an asynchronous function, so I'm going to add here await. And let's store in a local constant the value that is returned from this function, which is the updated document. Now, once again, if Mongoose was not able to find a document with the ID that we sent, it's going to return null. So if here we got null back from this function, it means that the document that we wanted to update could not be found. So let's add a check for this case. And if it is the case, I'm going to return 404 as the status code because the document that the client wanted to update could not be found. Otherwise, I'm just going to return 200 as the status code, and I'm going to return the to-do item as JSON. And once again, because we are working with a database here, I prefer to wrap this piece of code in a try block. And of course, we have to add this function to the export list of our controller. And the next step would be to use this function in our route. So let's open here our route file. And the HTTP method that's in charge of updating existing resources is put. So this is why here I'm going to add router.put. And the URL is going to be the same URL. This request deals with the same type of object, so the same URL. And once again, we are going to have here the path parameter. So once again, I'm going to have here ID. And I want to connect this route to the update to do function. So first, let me import this function. And now I'm also going to use it here. If we're now going back to Postman, and let's now try to update one of our tasks. So let me change the method to put, because as you remember, if we open our routes file, we can see that it is a put route. And from here, let me grab the ID of this task. And this is supposed to be the eat breakfast task. And I'll paste it here. And now in the body of this request, I only need the completed, but not the title. And this is because in the controller, here we're only using the completed field. So let me remove this one. I mean, it wouldn't hurt it if it was there, but we don't need it. And let's change the value to true, and let's send the request. And now I can send a GET request for the same ID, and I can see that now the completed value for the eat breakfast item is true. In a similar fashion, I also want to be able to delete or remove existing tasks. So we're going to follow the same order. Let's start with the service file, and it's here. And just like we had our update function, I'm going to add here delete function. And once again, this function is going to expect an ID parameter so that we know which of the tasks is the one to be deleted. As for doing it with Mongoose, once again, it's very easy. We need to access our model, which is to-do model. And then we have a Mongoose function called find by ID and delete. And here it is. And I'm only going to pass one parameter to this function, which is the ID of the item that we want to delete. And this function is also asynchronous, so this is why I'm going to add here await. And of course, we need to add this function to the list of the exports, so I'm going to add it here. Now that we have this function in our service file, we can move on to the controller. So let me open here my controller file. And in my controller, I want the corresponding function to this function. So let's put it here at the end. And let me create the new delete function. And as you remember, this one expects the request and response parameters instead of the ID itself. But we're going to extract the ID from the request. So let's start by doing just that. Let's find the ID. And I'm going to expect this ID as a path parameter in the request. So let me copy it from here and paste it here. And now that I have this, I'm simply going to access my service, so to do service, and use it to call the delete function. Then we need to pass the parameter, which is the ID of the task to be deleted, which is ID. And once again, we need to await the result. And let's also store it in a local constant. Now, once again, if we were not able to find a document whose ID is the ID that we sent, the find by ID and delete function will return null. In this case, we probably want to return 404 as our status code, so let's do that. Otherwise, I'm just going to return 200 as the status code. And once again, this is a database access, so let me wrap this piece of code with a try-catch block. And that would be it about this function. Let's also add it to our export object. So it's going to go here. And now that our controller is done, we should probably create a route so clients can actually use this functionality. So let's open the routes file and let's import the delete function from the controller. Let's add it here. And now I am going to add a delete route. So router.delete. And the path is going to be the same path. And of course, we do need the path parameter, so ID, so that we can identify the to-do item to be deleted. And I'm simply going to connect this route to the delete function from the controller. So let me paste it here. And now we have the full CRUD set. We can view the items that we currently have. We can create new items. We can update items that we currently have. And we can also delete existing items. So let's get back to Postman and let's try the full set. So let's remove the path parameter from here so we can get all of the tasks. And let me send this request. And we can see all of the documents that we currently have. Let's now add a new one. So I'm going to change it to a post request. And now I am going to have to provide both the title and the completed fields. So the title is going to be Eat Dinner. And let's send this request. Okay, and I forgot the comma here, so let's add it and let's send again. And we can see that it was added. And not only was it was added with a completed status as true. Let's see it in the website. So let me refresh my collection. And down here we have our Eat Dinner task. And we can see that its completed state is true. So let's try to change it. Let's get back to the API. And I'm going to copy the ID of this task and paste it here as my path parameter. And now I am going to send a put request. Now the body of this request only needs to contain the completed field. So let me remove the title field and let's change the value of completed to false. And let me send this request. And we can see that now completed is false. And if I want to completely remove this item, I'm going to send a delete request. And I'm going to use the same ID as my path parameter. And let's send this request. And we can see that it was deleted. And if we're going back to the website and refresh the collection, we can see that we no longer have this task.